Introduction. Have you ever felt like you're standing at the edge of a cliff, looking into the unknown, wondering if taking that next step will lead to solid ground or a devastating fall? Maybe you're facing a career change, a relationship challenge, financial uncertainty, or health concerns. Perhaps the world around you feels chaotic and unpredictable, and you're searching for something steady to hold on to. If any of this resonates with you, then you're exactly where you need to be right now. Because today, we're going to explore why this moment in your life, this very season you're walking through, is precisely the time when God is inviting you to trust Him like never before. I'm going to share with you why seasons of uncertainty aren't obstacles to faith, but actually doorways to deeper intimacy with God. We'll uncover the biblical truth that some of life's most beautiful transformations happen not in the calm, comfortable seasons, but in the storms. And by the end of our time together, you'll understand why this season, yes, this one you're in right now, might be the most important season of trust you'll ever experience. So, whether you're watching this during your morning coffee, on your lunch break, or late at night when sleep won't come because your mind is racing with worries, take a deep breath. You're about to discover that the very circumstances that feel like they're shaking your foundation might actually be God's way of building something stronger underneath you. Think about this for a moment. Throughout history, the most powerful testimonies of faith have come not from people who had easy lives, but from those who learned to trust God in impossible circumstances. Moses trusted God to part the Red Sea when an entire army was chasing him. David trusted God to defeat Goliath when everyone else was paralyzed by fear. Daniel trusted God in the lion's den when his very life was at stake. What made these men different? They understood something that many of us miss. The seasons that seem designed to destroy us are often the very seasons designed to develop us. They knew that when God allows pressure in our lives, He's not trying to crush us. He's trying to create diamonds. Your current season might feel overwhelming, confusing, or even painful. You might be wondering where God is, why He's allowing what He's allowing, or if He's forgotten about you altogether. But what if I told you that this season, this exact moment in your life, is actually a divine invitation to experience God's faithfulness in ways you never have before? What if the very thing that's causing you to question God's goodness is actually an opportunity to discover just how good He really is? What if the circumstance that's making you feel forgotten is actually God's way of drawing you closer to His heart? What if this season isn't about what's happening to you, but about what God wants to develop in you? Part 1. Understanding Seasons. Let's start with a fundamental truth that changes everything. God operates in seasons, and so do we. Look outside your window right now. Depending on where you live, you might see autumn leaves changing colors, winter snow covering the ground, spring flowers beginning to bloom, or the full green of summer. Each season has its purpose, its beauty, and its necessity. Without winter, there would be no spring. Without the dormancy of fall, there would be no harvest. The same principle applies to our spiritual lives. King Solomon, in all his wisdom, wrote in Ecclesiastes chapter 3, "To everything there is a season and a time to every purpose under heaven." He wasn't just talking about planting and harvesting crops. He was revealing a profound spiritual truth about how God orchestrates our lives. Think about this for a moment. Even Jesus operated within seasons. There was a season when he was a carpenter, working with his hands, living quietly in Nazareth. There was a season of ministry, traveling from town to town, healing the sick and teaching the crowds. There was a season of suffering, culminating in his death on the cross. And there was the season of resurrection and victory. Each season in Jesus' life was necessary. The quiet years in Nazareth prepared him for ministry. The ministry years prepared him for the cross. The cross prepared the way for the resurrection. Not one season was wasted or unnecessary. The same is true for you. The season you're walking through right now, whether it feels like winter with its cold challenges, spring with its new beginnings, summer with its abundance, or fall with its letting go, this season has been divinely orchestrated for your growth and God's glory. But here's what many people miss. The seasons that require the most trust are often the ones that produce the most fruit. Think about a farmer. He doesn't plant seeds in summer when everything looks green and alive. He plants in the dark, cold ground of early spring, trusting that what he can't see is actually working beneath the surface. Your current season might feel like that cold, dark ground. Maybe you're in a season of waiting, where prayers seem unanswered and dreams feel delayed. Maybe you're in a season of loss, where what once was secure has been shaken. Or perhaps you're in a season of transition, where the old is ending but the new hasn't fully begun. These are the seasons when trust becomes most crucial and most powerful. Because trust isn't really trust until it's all you have left to hold on to. Consider the story of Job. He was a man who had everything: wealth, family, health, reputation. But then he entered a season that stripped away everything he held dear. His children died, his wealth was destroyed, his health failed, and his friends abandoned him. Yet in the midst of this devastating season, Job made a declaration that echoes through the ages. Though he slay me, yet will I trust him. Job understood something profound about seasons. He knew that his circumstances were temporary, but his God was eternal. He knew that what he was going through was a season, not a permanent state. And most importantly, he knew that the same God who had blessed him in the good times was still God in the difficult times. Every season serves a purpose in God's grand design for your life. The season of abundance teaches you gratitude and generosity. The season of lack teaches you dependence and faith. The season of joy strengthens your praise. The season of sorrow deepens your compassion. The season of clarity builds your confidence. The season of confusion develops your trust. Right now, you might be looking at your season and wondering what possible purpose it could serve. But remember, a caterpillar going through metamorphosis has no idea it's going to become a butterfly. All it knows is that everything familiar is dissolving, everything secure is changing, and everything comfortable is being challenged. You might be in your cocoon season right now. Everything feels dark, confined, and uncertain. But what you can't see is that God is doing something miraculous. He's not just changing your circumstances, He's changing you. He's not just working on your situation, He's working on your character, your faith, and your relationship with Him. The butterfly doesn't emerge from the cocoon the same as when it went in. It doesn't just get its old life back with a few improvements, it gets a completely new identity, new abilities, and new purposes. And so will you. Your season is not random. It's not a mistake. It's not evidence that God has forgotten you. It's carefully orchestrated by a loving Father who knows exactly what you need and when you need it. He's not just getting you through this season, He's growing you through it. Part 2. Why this season matters. Now, you might be wondering, how do I know this is actually the season to trust God? Maybe I should wait until things get better, until I have more clarity, until the circumstances improve. But that thinking misses the profound truth about how God works in our lives. God doesn't wait for perfect conditions to move in our lives. He creates perfect opportunities for us to trust Him within imperfect conditions. Let me share with you 3 reasons why your current season is the ideal season for trust. First, this is the season God has you in right now. This isn't an accident or a mistake. The God who numbers the hairs on your head and knows when a sparrow falls hasn't somehow lost track of your situation. He's not pacing around heaven wondering what to do about your circumstances. He knew this season was coming before you were even born, and He's been preparing you for it and preparing it for you. The prophet Jeremiah reminds us of this beautiful truth. For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans for welfare and not for evil, to give you a future and a hope. Notice that God says He knows the plans He has for you, not the plans He had for you or the plans He might have for you, but the plans He has for you right now, in this season. Think about the timing of Jesus' birth. He wasn't born in a palace when everything was perfect and comfortable. He was born in a stable during a census, when Mary and Joseph were displaced and traveling. He wasn't born when the political climate was ideal or when the religious leaders were expecting Him. He was born at exactly the right time according to God's perfect plan. The Apostle Paul writes about this in Galatians. But when the fullness of time had come, God sent forth His Son. The fullness of time didn't mean when conditions were perfect, it meant when God's timing was perfect. And God's timing is always perfect, even when it doesn't feel that way to us. Your season right now is your fullness of time for learning to trust God. Not next season, when things might be easier. Not last season, when things might have been clearer. This season, this moment. This is your divinely appointed time to discover what it means to truly rely on God. Second, this season contains opportunities for growth that no other season can provide. Think about physical exercise. Your muscles don't grow when you're resting comfortably on the couch. They grow when they're challenged, when they're pushed beyond their comfort zone, when they're required to bear weight they've never carried before. Your faith operates the same way. The Apostle James understood this when he wrote, "Consider it pure joy, my brothers and sisters, whenever you face trials of many kinds, because you know that the testing of your faith produces perseverance. Let perseverance finish its work, so that you may be mature and complete, not lacking anything." Notice, James doesn't say we should be joyful about our problems, but that we should be joyful in the midst of them because of what God is producing through them. This season you're in, with all its challenges and uncertainties, is developing spiritual muscles in you that simply cannot be developed any other way. Consider the story of Peter walking on water. He didn't learn to trust Jesus by sitting safely in the boat. He learned by stepping out into the storm, by feeling the waves beneath his feet, by experiencing what it meant to keep his eyes on Jesus when everything around him was chaotic. Peter's faith was developed not in calm seas, but in turbulent waters. Your current season might feel like turbulent waters, but that's exactly where water-walking faith is developed. You can't learn to trust God in the storm by avoiding the storm. You learn by stepping out of the boat of your comfort zone and keeping your eyes fixed on Jesus. The challenges you're facing right now are not obstacles to your spiritual growth. They are the very means by which your spiritual growth is happening. God isn't waiting for your problems to go away so He can develop your faith. He's using your problems to develop your faith. Every moment of uncertainty is an opportunity to choose trust over worry. Every financial pressure is an opportunity to discover God as your provider. Every relationship challenge is an opportunity to learn about God's unfailing love. Every health concern is an opportunity to understand God as your healer. Every unanswered prayer is an opportunity to develop patience and surrender. These opportunities for growth don't exist in seasons of ease and comfort. They only exist in seasons that require you to reach beyond yourself and grab hold of God. This season is your spiritual gymnasium, and every challenge is exercise equipment designed to make your faith stronger. Third, this season is preparing you for the next season. God never wastes anything. Every season of trust prepares you for greater levels of faith and responsibility in the seasons to come. Joseph understood this. His season of slavery in Egypt seemed like a detour from God's plan, but it was actually preparation. His season in prison felt like punishment, but it was positioning. When Pharaoh needed someone to manage Egypt during 7 years of famine, God had already prepared Joseph through years of trusting him in difficult circumstances. Your current season isn't just about getting through, it's about growing up. God is developing in you the character, wisdom, and faith that your future will require. Think about David's years in the wilderness running from King Saul. Those weren't wasted years or punishment years, they were preparation years. In the wilderness, David learned to depend on God completely. He learned to lead under pressure. He learned to forgive his enemies. He learned to worship in difficult circumstances. Every skill he would need as king was developed during his season of running and hiding. If David had been given the throne immediately after Samuel anointed him, he wouldn't have been ready for it. The crown would have been too heavy, the responsibilities too great, the pressures too intense. He needed the wilderness season to prepare him for the palace season. Your wilderness season is preparing you for your palace season. The struggles you're facing now are developing the strength you'll need later. The patience you're learning now will serve you in future leadership roles. The faith you're building now will sustain you through future challenges. The character you're developing now will impact future generations. God sees not just who you are now, but who you're becoming. He's not just concerned with getting you through this season. He's concerned with what this season is producing in you for the seasons to come. Your current difficulties are not roadblocks to your destiny, they're stepping stones to it. Every person in the Bible who was used greatly by God went through seasons that prepared them for their purpose. Moses spent 40 years in the desert before leading Israel out of Egypt. Paul spent years in Arabia after his conversion before beginning his missionary journeys. Jesus spent 30 years in obscurity before beginning his public ministry. Your preparation season might feel long and difficult, but it's absolutely necessary. God is building something in you that can only be built through the pressures and challenges of this season. He's preparing you for something greater than you can imagine, and that preparation requires exactly the circumstances you're facing right now. Part 3. What trust actually looks like. Now that we understand why this is the season to trust God, we need to understand what trust actually looks like in practical, everyday terms. Because trust isn't just a feeling, it's a decision that gets expressed through actions. Trust looks like obedience even when you don't understand the purpose. Abraham is called the father of faith, but his trust was demonstrated through his willingness to leave his comfortable life in Ur and journey to a land God would show him. The key phrase is that I will show you. Abraham didn't have GPS coordinates or a detailed itinerary. He had a promise from God and a willingness to take the next step. Maybe God is asking you to take a step right now, and you're waiting for more information, more confirmation, more security. But trust doesn't wait for certainty. Trust moves forward in the midst of uncertainty because it knows who is leading. Think about Abraham's willingness to sacrifice Isaac. This wasn't just a test of his love for God, it was a test of his trust in God's character. Abraham knew God had promised that through Isaac, his descendants would be as numerous as the stars. So when God asked him to sacrifice Isaac, Abraham trusted that God would either provide a substitute or raise Isaac from the dead. His obedience was rooted in his confidence in God's faithfulness. Your obedience to God's leading in this season might not make sense to others. People might question your decisions, challenge your choices, or suggest you're being foolish. But trust doesn't require the approval of others. It requires the approval of God. And God is pleased when you trust Him enough to obey even when obedience is costly. Maybe God is asking you to forgive someone who doesn't deserve it. Maybe He's calling you to a job that pays less but aligns more with His purposes. Maybe He's leading you to start a ministry, go back to school, or move to a new city. Trust says yes to God's direction even when it doesn't make sense to your natural mind. Obedience is the language of trust. When you obey God's promptings, His word, and His Spirit's leading, you're declaring that you trust His wisdom more than your own understanding. You're choosing to believe that His ways are higher than your ways and His thoughts higher than your thoughts. Trust looks like worship in the wilderness. When Paul and Silas were thrown into prison for preaching the gospel, they didn't spend the night complaining about their circumstances or questioning God's plan. They spent it singing hymns and praising God. Their trust was expressed through worship, even in the worst of circumstances. This doesn't mean you have to pretend everything is fine when it's not. It means you choose to focus on who God is rather than just what you're going through. It means you declare His goodness even when you can't see His hand. It means you sing His praises even when your voice is shaky and your heart is heavy. Worship in the wilderness is one of the most powerful expressions of trust because it declares that your circumstances don't determine your God's character. It says that even when you don't understand what He's doing, you still believe He is good. Even when you can't trace His hand, you can still trust His heart. David understood this. Many of his psalms were written during his most difficult seasons, running from Saul, facing betrayal from friends, dealing with family dysfunction, struggling with personal sin. Yet these psalms are filled with declarations of God's faithfulness, goodness, and love. David chose to worship his way through his wilderness seasons. Worship changes the atmosphere of your season. It doesn't necessarily change your circumstances, but it changes your perspective on your circumstances. It reminds you that God is bigger than your problems, stronger than your enemies, and more faithful than your feelings suggest. When you worship in your wilderness, you're not just encouraging yourself, you're creating an earthquake in the spiritual realm. Paul and Silas's midnight worship service literally shook the foundations of the prison and opened every door. Your worship in this season has the power to shake things loose in the spiritual realm and open doors that seem permanently locked. Trust looks like giving when it seems like you should be saving. This might seem counterintuitive, but one of the most powerful expressions of trust is generosity in the midst of scarcity. When the widow gave her last 2 coins to the temple treasury, Jesus said she had given more than all the wealthy people because she gave out of her poverty, not her abundance. Giving when you're struggling financially, giving time when you feel overwhelmed, giving encouragement when you need encouragement yourself. This is trust in action. It's saying, I believe God is my source, not my circumstances. This doesn't mean being foolish with money or ignoring practical responsibilities. It means recognizing that God's economy operates differently than the world's economy. In God's economy, giving creates receiving, sowing creates reaping, and blessing others creates blessing for yourself. Think about the widow of Zarephath who fed Elijah during a famine. She was down to her last meal, preparing to eat it with her son and then die. But when Elijah asked her to make him a cake first, she trusted God enough to give out of her lack. As a result, her oil and flour didn't run out for the entire duration of the famine. Her trust expressed through generosity created a miracle of provision. Maybe God is asking you to be generous with someone during your season of financial pressure. Maybe He's calling you to give time to a ministry when your schedule is already full. Maybe He's prompting you to encourage someone else when you're the one who needs encouragement. Trust says yes to these promptings because it believes God will supply what you need as you supply what others need. Generous trust also applies to forgiveness. Forgiving someone who has hurt you is a form of generosity. You're giving them something they don't deserve. But forgiveness is also trust in action. It's trusting God to be your vindication, your justice, and your healer. It's believing that God can handle your hurt better than you can. Trust looks like rest in the midst of the storm. Remember when Jesus fell asleep in the boat while His disciples panicked about the storm? He wasn't being careless or irresponsible. He was demonstrating perfect trust in His Father's care. He knew that no storm could sink a boat that was carrying out God's will. Sometimes trust looks like laying your head down at night and actually sleeping, even though your problems are still there in the morning. It looks like taking breaks, saying no to additional burdens, and refusing to carry weight that God never intended for you to bear. Rest is an act of faith. It's declaring that the world doesn't depend on you staying awake and worrying. It's acknowledging that God is working even when you're sleeping. It's trusting that He can accomplish more in His strength than you can in yours. Many people think they're showing faith by working harder, worrying more, or trying to control every detail of their situation. But sometimes the most faithful thing you can do is rest. Sometimes trust looks like stopping your frantic activity and letting God work. This doesn't mean being passive or lazy. It means finding the balance between doing your part and trusting God to do His part. It means working when it's time to work and resting when it's time to rest. It means carrying your responsibilities without carrying burdens that belong to God. The Sabbath was God's idea, not man's. He built rest into the rhythm of life because He knows we need it physically, emotionally, and spiritually. When you rest, you're declaring that your identity is not found in your productivity, but in your relationship with God. You're trusting that He loves you for who you are, not just for what you do. Trust looks like patience with God's timing. David was anointed as king when he was just a teenager, but he didn't sit on the throne until he was 30 years old. Those weren't wasted years, they were preparation years. David learned to trust God's timing as much as God's promises. Your season of waiting isn't empty time, it's full time. God is working in you and around you, setting up circumstances, preparing hearts, orchestrating details that you can't even see. Trust says, God, I believe your timing is perfect, even when it doesn't feel that way. Patience is one of the hardest expressions of trust because we live in an instant gratification culture. We're used to getting what we want when we want it. But God's timing is based on what's best, not what's fast. He's more interested in doing things right than doing them quickly. Think about how long it took God to fulfill His promise to Abraham about having a son. Abraham was 75 when God first made the promise, and he was 100 when Isaac was born. 25 years of waiting, wondering, and trusting. But Isaac was worth the wait because he came at exactly the right time according to God's perfect plan. Your promise might be taking longer than you expected, but it's not taking longer than God planned. He knows exactly when the timing will be perfect, when all the pieces will be in place, when your character will be ready for your destiny. Trust says, God, I'll wait as long as it takes because I believe your timing is perfect. Patience doesn't mean sitting around doing nothing. It means actively waiting, continuing to grow, continuing to serve, continuing to prepare for what God has promised. It means staying faithful in the small things while God prepares you for the big things. Part 4. Overcoming trust obstacles. Let's be honest about something. Trusting God isn't always easy. There are real obstacles, legitimate concerns, and genuine fears that make trust challenging. But recognizing these obstacles is the first step to overcoming them. The obstacle of past disappointment. Maybe you trusted God before and things didn't work out the way you expected. You prayed, you believed, you stepped out in faith, and you got hurt. Now you're hesitant to trust again because you're afraid of being disappointed again. Here's what you need to understand. God's faithfulness isn't measured by whether He gives you what you want, but by whether He gives you what you need. Sometimes what we think we need and what we actually need are two different things. God's love for you is so great that He will sometimes allow short-term disappointment to protect you from long-term disaster. The story of Lazarus illustrates this beautifully. When Lazarus got sick, his sisters Mary and Martha sent word to Jesus, expecting Him to come immediately and heal their brother. Instead, Jesus stayed where He was for 2 more days, and Lazarus died. From their perspective, Jesus had disappointed them. But Jesus had a greater plan. He didn't just want to heal Lazarus, He wanted to resurrect him. He didn't just want to solve their problem, He wanted to demonstrate His power over death itself. Sometimes God's delays are actually God's divine appointments with something greater than what we originally asked for. Looking back on your past disappointments, can you see ways that God was actually protecting you or preparing you for something better? That job you didn't get might have saved you from a toxic work environment. That relationship that ended might have prevented you from settling for less than God's best. That opportunity that fell through might have redirected you toward your true calling. God's love for you is so great that He would rather disappoint you temporarily than damage you permanently. He sees the whole picture while you see only a small piece. He knows what's coming while you only know what is. Trust His love even when you don't understand His methods. Sometimes God says no, not because He doesn't love you, but because He does love you. Sometimes He closes doors not to frustrate you, but to redirect you. Sometimes He allows disappointment not to hurt you, but to heal you from wanting something that would ultimately harm you. Your past disappointments don't disqualify you from future blessings. They qualify you to appreciate God's goodness in new ways. They teach you to hold God's gifts with open hands rather than clenched fists. They prepare you to trust God's heart even when you can't see His hand. The obstacle of feeling unworthy. Another major barrier to trust is the feeling that you don't deserve God's help. Maybe you've made mistakes. Maybe you haven't been consistent in your faith. Maybe you feel like you've disappointed God too many times. But here's the revolutionary truth of the gospel. God's love for you isn't based on your performance. It's based on His character. The ground is level at the foot of the cross. You don't earn God's love by being good enough, and you can't lose it by being bad enough. The thief on the cross next to Jesus hadn't been to church, hadn't read his Bible, hadn't lived a righteous life. But in his final moments, he turned to Jesus and said, "Remember me when you come into your kingdom." And Jesus responded, "Today you will be with me in paradise." Your season of trust doesn't require you to clean up your life first. It requires you to come to God as you are and trust Him to do the cleaning. Think about the woman caught in adultery. She was dragged before Jesus in the middle of her shame, her failure exposed for everyone to see. The religious leaders expected Jesus to condemn her, but instead He said, "Neither do I condemn you. Go and sin no more." He didn't wait for her to change before showing her grace. He showed her grace so she could change. God's love for you is not based on what you've done, it's based on what Jesus has done. Your worthiness doesn't come from your performance, it comes from Christ's performance on your behalf. You can trust God not because you're perfect, but because He is perfect. Your mistakes don't disqualify you from God's love. They qualify you to understand the depth of His grace. Your failures don't make you unworthy of His help. They make His help more precious when it comes. Your past doesn't determine your future. God's promises determine your future. The enemy wants you to believe that your past mistakes make you unworthy of God's blessings. But God's grace is bigger than your biggest failure. His love is stronger than your strongest shame. His forgiveness is deeper than your deepest regret. The obstacle of wanting to understand everything. We live in an information age where we can Google almost any question and get an instant answer, but God often asks us to trust Him without giving us all the details up front. This can be frustrating for our minds that want to analyze, plan, and control. But consider this. If you could understand everything about God's plan for your life, He wouldn't be much of a God, would He? The very fact that His ways are higher than your ways and His thoughts higher than your thoughts is what makes Him trustworthy. A God you could fully understand would be too small to handle the complexity of your life. Think about a child getting a vaccination. The child doesn't understand why the doctor is causing pain. All they know is that it hurts. But the parent understands that temporary pain is preventing much greater future suffering. The child has to trust the parent's wisdom even when they don't understand the process. Sometimes God asks you to trust His wisdom even when you don't understand His methods. He asks you to believe in His goodness even when you can't see the good in your situation. He asks you to have confidence in His plan even when you can't figure out the plan yourself. Your need to understand everything before you trust is actually pride disguised as wisdom. It's saying that God's plans aren't valid unless they make sense to your limited perspective. It's demanding that the infinite God explain Himself to your finite mind. But true trust doesn't require complete understanding. It requires complete confidence in the one who understands everything. You don't have to know what God is doing as long as you know that God knows what He's doing. Mystery is not the enemy of faith, it's the playground of faith. Faith actually thrives in the space between what you can see and what you can understand. If you could understand everything, you wouldn't need faith. If you could see everything, you wouldn't need trust. The obstacle of comparison. Social media has made this obstacle particularly challenging. You see other people who seem to have easier lives, clearer direction, more resources, stronger faith. You wonder why God seems to be blessing them while you're still waiting, still struggling, still learning to trust. But you're not seeing the full picture of their lives, and they're not seeing the full picture of yours. God has an individualized plan for each of His children. Your season of trust is specifically designed for your growth, your purpose, and your unique relationship with Him. The grass might look greener on the other side, but you don't know what fertilizer they had to go through to get that grass so green. Comparison is the thief of joy and the enemy of trust. When you compare your behind-the-scenes struggle with someone else's highlight reel, you'll always feel like you're coming up short. But God doesn't compare His children. He loves each one uniquely and completely. Think about Peter and John. After Jesus' resurrection, Peter asked Jesus what would happen to John. Jesus basically told him, "That's none of your business. You focus on following me." Each disciple had a different calling, a different path, and a different purpose. Peter's job wasn't to understand John's journey. It was to trust Jesus with his own journey. Your job isn't to understand why God is allowing what He's allowing in someone else's life. Your job is to trust Him with what He's allowing in your life. Their blessing doesn't diminish your blessing. Their breakthrough doesn't delay your breakthrough. Their season doesn't determine your season. God has enough blessings for everyone. He has enough love for everyone. He has enough grace for everyone. Someone else's blessing doesn't mean there's less blessing available for you. God's resources are infinite, and His love for you is personal and complete. Instead of comparing your season with others, celebrate their victories and trust God for your own. Instead of wondering why they're blessed while you're struggling, ask God what He wants to teach you in your struggle. Instead of envying their season, embrace the unique purpose of your season. Part 5. The promises that anchor us. When trust feels difficult, we need solid ground to stand on. That solid ground is found in the unchanging promises of God. These aren't just nice words or positive thoughts. They are covenant commitments from a God who cannot lie. God promises to never leave you or forsake you. In Deuteronomy 31:6, God declares, "Be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid or terrified because of them, for the Lord your God goes with you. He will never leave you nor forsake you." This isn't a conditional promise based on your behavior or circumstances. It's a blanket promise that covers every season of your life. Even when you can't feel His presence, He's there. Even when circumstances seem to suggest He's absent, He's working. Even when other people abandon you, he remains faithful. Think about the 3 Hebrew boys in the fiery furnace. They trusted God even when they couldn't see how he would deliver them. They said, "Our God is able to deliver us, but even if he doesn't, we still won't bow down." They trusted God's presence more than their circumstances, and when they were thrown into the fire, they discovered that God was not only with them, he was in the fire with them. Your fiery furnace season doesn't mean God has abandoned you. It means he's in the fire with you. The very circumstances that feel like they're burning you up might be the place where you discover God's presence in ways you never have before. This promise of God's presence isn't just for the good times, it's especially for the hard times. When everyone else walks away, God walks closer. When you feel most alone, he's most near. When you can't find him anywhere else, look in the midst of your struggle. That's where he often reveals himself most clearly. God's presence doesn't always mean the removal of problems. Sometimes it means the provision of strength to endure problems. It doesn't always mean the absence of pain. Sometimes it means the presence of peace in the midst of pain. His presence is your anchor when everything else is shifting. The word forsake means to abandon completely, to leave behind, to give up on. God promises he will never give up on you, no matter what season you're in, no matter what you've done, no matter how far you've wandered. His love for you is not based on your faithfulness to him, it's based on his faithfulness to his own character. God promises to work everything together for good. Romans 8:28 is often misquoted, but when we read it correctly, it provides incredible hope. And we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love him, who have been called according to his purpose. Notice it doesn't say all things are good. Some things are painful, difficult, and hard to understand. But it promises that God works in all things to bring about good for those who love him. This means your current season, no matter how challenging, is not outside of God's ability to use for your benefit and his glory. He's the master at taking what was meant to harm you and turning it into something that helps you. Joseph's story is the perfect example of this promise in action. His brothers sold him into slavery out of jealousy and hatred. That wasn't good. He was falsely accused by Potiphar's wife and thrown into prison. That wasn't good. He was forgotten by the butler he had helped. That wasn't good. But God worked in all these circumstances to position Joseph as the second most powerful man in Egypt, perfectly placed to save his family and an entire nation from famine. When Joseph finally revealed himself to his brothers, he said, "You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives." Joseph understood that God hadn't caused his suffering, but God had certainly used his suffering for a greater purpose. Your current struggles are not the end of your story. They're plot twists in a story that God is writing for his glory and your good. The chapter you're in right now might be difficult to read, but it's setting up something beautiful in the chapters to come. This promise doesn't mean you'll understand how God is working everything together while you're in the middle of it. You might not see the good until much later, but you can trust that God is working even when you can't see his work, orchestrating even when you can't understand his orchestration, weaving together even when you can only see individual threads. Sometimes the good that God brings from our difficulties isn't what we expected. Maybe he doesn't heal your body, but he uses your illness to heal relationships. Maybe he doesn't restore your marriage, but he uses your divorce to develop a ministry to other hurting people. Maybe he doesn't give you the job you wanted, but he uses your unemployment to redirect you toward your true calling. God's definition of good is often different from our definition, but his definition is always better. He sees the eternal picture while we see the temporary situation. He knows what will benefit us forever while we focus on what will help us today. God promises to supply all your needs. Philippians 4:19 reminds us that my God will meet all your needs according to the riches of his glory in Christ Jesus. Notice it says needs, not wants. God commits to providing what you need for the season you're in. Sometimes we worry because we don't see how our needs will be met next month or next year, but God operates on a day-by-day provision model. When the Israelites were in the wilderness, he provided manna daily, not weekly or monthly. He gives you what you need for today, and he'll give you what you need for tomorrow when tomorrow comes. This promise is based on God's riches, not your resources. It's according to his abundance, not your ability. When you feel like you don't have enough money, enough time, enough energy, enough wisdom, remember that your God has more than enough. His resources are unlimited, his wisdom is infinite, and his power is inexhaustible. Think about Elijah during the drought. God could have provided for him in many ways, but he chose to use ravens to bring him food twice a day. Ravens, scavenger birds that eat dead things, became God's delivery system for fresh bread and meat. If God can use ravens to provide for his servant, he can use anything to provide for you. Your provision might come in ways you don't expect, through people you wouldn't have imagined, at times when you've almost given up hope. But it will come because God's promises are as sure as his character, and his character is absolutely trustworthy. This doesn't mean you'll always have everything you want, but you'll always have everything you need. You might not have luxury, but you'll have sufficiency. You might not have abundance, but you'll have enough. And sometimes, having enough is more than having everything. God knows the difference between your needs and your wants, and his promise covers your needs. He knows what you need for your physical health, your emotional well-being, your spiritual growth, and your purpose fulfillment. He's committed to providing all of it according to his riches in glory. God promises that his plans for you are good. Jeremiah 29:11 is a verse that has brought hope to millions. For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, to give you hope and a future. This promise was originally given to people in exile, people whose circumstances looked hopeless. Your current season might feel like exile, far from where you want to be, far from what you expected. But God's plans for you haven't changed. His purposes for your life are still good, even when your circumstances are difficult. The word prosper in this verse doesn't just mean financial success. It means to flourish, to thrive, to succeed in the deepest sense. God's plan is for you to flourish as a person, to thrive in your relationship with him, to succeed in fulfilling the purpose he has for your life. His plans are not just good, they're the best possible plans for your life. He sees all the variables, all the possibilities, all the consequences of every choice and every path. He knows what will bring you the greatest joy, the deepest fulfillment, and the most significant impact. His plans take into account not just your immediate happiness, but your eternal significance. God's plans for you include hope and a future. Hope means confident expectation of good things to come. Future means there are chapters of your story yet to be written, dreams yet to be fulfilled, purposes yet to be accomplished. Your best days are not behind you. They're ahead of you. Even if you've made mistakes, even if you've wasted time, even if you've missed opportunities, God's plans for you still include hope and a future. He's the God of second chances, new beginnings, and redemptive purposes. He can take your broken pieces and create something more beautiful than what you had before. These promises aren't magic formulas or guarantees that life will be easy. They're anchors for your soul in the storms of life. They remind you that no matter what season you're walking through, you're not walking through it alone, and you're not walking through it without purpose. When doubt whispers that God has forgotten you, remember his promise to never leave you. When circumstances suggest that everything is falling apart, remember his promise to work all things together for good. When worry says you won't have what you need, remember his promise to supply all your needs. When fear says your future is uncertain, remember his promise that his plans for you are good. Conclusion: stepping into trust. As we come to the end of our time together, I want you to know that you have everything you need to trust God in this season. You don't need more faith, you need to act on the faith you already have. You don't need to wait for better circumstances, you need to trust God within your current circumstances. Here's what I want you to do right now. Think about one area of your life where God is asking you to trust him. Maybe it's a decision you need to make, a relationship you need to surrender, a fear you need to face, or a step you need to take. Picture that area clearly in your mind. Now, instead of focusing on all the reasons why trust feels difficult, focus on all the reasons why God is trustworthy. Remember his faithfulness in your past, consider his promises for your present, anticipate his goodness in your future. Think about every time God has come through for you before. Remember when you thought you wouldn't make it through that difficult season, but you did. Recall when you didn't know how you would handle that challenge, but somehow you found the strength. Consider all the times when God provided just what you needed at just the right time. Those weren't coincidences, they were demonstrations of God's faithfulness. And the same God who was faithful then is faithful now. The same God who provided then will provide now. The same God who sustained you then will sustain you now. This is your season to trust God, not because your circumstances are perfect, but because He is perfect in the midst of your circumstances. Not because you have all the answers, but because you know the one who does. Not because the path is clear, but because your guide is faithful. Your season of trust starts right now with your very next decision. Will you choose fear or faith? Will you choose worry or worship? Will you choose to lean on your own understanding or trust in the Lord with all your heart? The choice is yours, but I believe you're going to choose trust. I believe you're going to step into this season with confidence, not in your own strength, but in the strength of the one who has never failed you and never will. Maybe you're facing a medical diagnosis that has shaken your world. Trust God with your health. Maybe you're dealing with financial pressures that keep you awake at night. Trust God as your provider. Maybe you're navigating a relationship crisis that threatens everything you hold dear. Trust God as your counselor and healer. Maybe you're at a crossroads in your career and don't know which direction to take. Trust God as your guide. Whatever your season looks like, whatever challenges you're facing, whatever uncertainties you're navigating, this is your moment to trust God like never before. This is your opportunity to discover that He is faithful even when everything else feels unstable. This is your chance to learn that His love for you is constant even when your circumstances are changing. Trust doesn't mean you won't have questions. Trust doesn't mean you won't have moments of doubt. Trust doesn't mean you won't sometimes feel afraid. Trust means that in the midst of your questions, doubts, and fears, you choose to believe that God is good, God is faithful, and God is working on your behalf. Your trust doesn't have to be perfect to be powerful. Your faith doesn't have to be huge to be effective. Remember, Jesus said that faith as small as a mustard seed can move mountains. Your small steps of trust can create big moves of God in your life. This is your season. This is your moment. This is your time to trust God like never before. And He's ready to show you just how faithful He can be. He's ready to demonstrate His goodness in ways that will amaze you. He's ready to work in your situation in ways that will leave you in awe of His power and provision. So take that step of trust. Make that decision to believe. Choose to worship instead of worry. Decide to give instead of grasp. Commit to rest instead of strive. Determine to wait patiently instead of rush anxiously. Your season of trust begins now, and it's going to be beautiful. Bajie salut. Remember to subscribe for more content on faith, hope, and walking with God through every season of life. Share this video with someone who needs to hear this message today, and leave a comment below about how you're choosing to trust God in your current season. I'd love to hear your story and pray for you as you step into this season of trust.